Everything is dripping with blackness, and I absolutely love it.
The fire's getting started. The fire's getting started. You got just what you wanted. Be careful what you wish for. You knocking on the wrong door. You want that dark side of me? Say hello to Ivy.
Hello, all you ghosts, ghouls, and goblins. I'm Casey Ivy, and this is Hello Ivy, my YouTube channel where I will talk my black girl shit about everything Halloween, horror, and spooky. So today we are talking about the one, the only, Sinners, theatrically released on April 18th and then released exclusively to HBO on July 4th. This movie was written and directed by Ryan Coogler, and oh my god. Nobody can stop talking about this movie, and obviously I've been talking my head off about it if you talk to me face to face, so let's get into it. So I was trying to figure out the best way to summarize Sinners, and it's very difficult to do, so I'm just gonna say what IMDb says it to be. So Sinners is about two twin brothers that are trying to escape a troubled past and coming back home to discover a greater evil waiting for them. I feel like that is such a very general synopsis of this movie, because buckle up, Buttercup, are we in for a ride? So Sinners ends up being a vampire flick packed with action, packed with horror, packed with gore, and love and passion, and a whole lot of blackness. Ryan Coogler has stated in interviews that the inspiration for Sinners came from his grandfather Pat and his uncle James, who both came from Mississippi. And you can tell by the way he speaks about these family members in interviews and his attention to detail that he has a high respect and regard for Mississippi, its history, and his family. You can tell that there is a lot of heart and passion in every single scene, and so much so that I walked out of a horror movie, crying. So before I really dig into this movie, I have to give like my little awards and shout outs, because this cast, this crew was absolutely stacked, and Ryan Coogler did that thing, okay? So starting at the top, of course, we have Mr. Ryan Coogler himself. He did such a great job leading and being the helm of this movie. Next up, we have Ludwig Göransson, who aced it with the musical score of this movie. Everything from the instruments down to every single string and horn, everything just hit to a T. And quite frankly, if you listen to the soundtrack and watch the movie, you're gonna have a beautiful experience. I'll get down to that a little bit later. Autumn Dorald Arkapaw. This person was in charge of cinematography and did the damn thing, okay? This movie was shot in IMAX, and they used multiple cameras and different angles. I mean, that's the norm for a lot of movies, but switching between IMAX and a standard camera and 16mm and all this other stuff just to come up with this beautiful masterpiece, and it really shows. If you didn't see this movie in IMAX, you definitely missed out. So I hope they do another re-release just so people can catch it in IMAX, because the sound and the cinematography really shows. Hannah Beachler, production design team, let's go. There are so many moving pieces behind the camera that a lot of people don't get their mention, so Hannah Beachler, we're calling you out right now. Every attention to detail on the set was beautiful and was able to drop some Easter eggs, so I'm definitely gonna have to give a 4th, 5th, 6th rewatch to catch them all. Ruth E. Carter, girl. This lovely lady was in charge of costume design, and my God. The costuming is so intricate, from the fabrics on their suits to the colors of their suits. The details on Annie's costume as a hoodoo woman. Everything was just chef's kiss. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful job. And of course, we have to give it up to the actors themselves. We have Miles Caton, Michael B. Jordan, Haley Steinfeld, Wunmi Mosaku, Omar Miller, Delroy Lindo, Jack O'Connell, Yao, Lee Jun Lee, Jamie Lawson. Oh my gosh, y'all were just beautifully casted in y'all roles and did such an amazing job with every single thing that y'all did. The connections, the love, the passion, the passion. Everything just hit so beautifully because y'all were masterfully cast, which brings me to another shout out that I have to mention. Francine Maisler, who was the casting director on this project. Ryan Coogler and Francine Maisler really did the teamwork to make the dream work on this project. So thank you all for bringing this marvelous piece of art to us and sharing such a beautiful part of yourselves with this audience. So a quick recap of the movie for anyone who might not have seen it. So Sinners starts out on October 16th, 1932 in the Mississippi Delta, and we basically get a full 24 hours between October 15th and October 16th of what happened. So it starts off with Sammy, played marvelously by Miles Caton, driving back to his father's church. He's beaten, he's torn, and he literally has 3 deep scratches across his neck and face, while he clings on to the neck of the remainder of his banjo. He enters the church, which is kind of the equivalent of someone walking into a church looking for salvation, and goes up to his father. But as he's approaching his father and he's listening to his father's words, his father is calling to him. His father, named Jedediah, played by Saul Williams. His father is basically saying, "Come to me, my child," as he's preaching to his church and preaching to his son. We also get cuts of this very weird character, this creature, calling out to Sammy as well. His teeth are sharp, he's covered in blood, and that is how we're introduced to the world of this movie. Then we get a nice little caption that says the day before or the night before, I can't remember exactly which one. We start by getting introduced to Elijah and Elias Moore, also known as the Smokestack Twins. They're coming back home to the Mississippi Delta after spending years away in Chicago. And they're here back in the Mississippi Delta to open up their own juke joint, so they meet with Hogwood. Hogwood is a white man that is basically selling them this property, but there's more details that I'll get into a little bit later. So the Smokestack Twins are ready to get this party jumping and going, but they have to assemble a crew first. So first up, they go and pick up their little cousin Sammy. Sammy, who is nice and clean and also just promised his father that he'll be back in time for church tomorrow, so that way he can sing for his congregation. Now they both have a lot of things to do, so the first thing they do is go pick up the liquor stash. While they were in Chicago, they were able to rip off 2 of the biggest crime gangs to take their liquor, bringing it right on down to the Mississippi Delta to sell in their juke joint and make some money. But the first thing they got to do is split up. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is a horror movie. Black people shouldn't be splitting up, but nothing has gotten too crazy yet, so splitting up at this point is currently okay. So Smoke is handling his own set of business in town, which is also a very important historical point, where black people are shopping on one side of the street and white people are shopping on the other side of the street. And a lot of these stores are run by Asian Americans who found themselves in this weird middle ground between both races, not really declined or accepted by either. But they utilize their tools to be able to make money off of, well, everybody. So we have Smoke coming in, and this is where we meet the Chow family. You have Bo Chow, played expertly by Yao, and you have Grace Chow, played by Lee Jun Lee. So Bo is on the black side of the street, which is where we meet him, when Smoke approaches him basically asking for food and signage. But then Bo has to send his daughter across the street to grab Grace, who's on the white side of the street. They come over, they get down to talking to business, have settled their numbers, and now the business part of Smoke's side is complete. Now we switch over to Stack and Sammy. So their first stop is to a plantation, basically. So all of this is happening, and this is where we meet Cornbread. And Cornbread is a beautiful comic relief played marvelously by Omar Miller. And basically Stack tells him, yo, you need to come on down so that way you can make yourself some money. And when you do, your wife will be very happy and will satisfy you, if you know what I mean. So now Cornbread is locked in, but they still gotta gather the rest of the crew. Then we move forward to a train station, which is still also very segregated, as they have signs saying white only water fountain, white only waiting area, things of that nature. And we meet Delta Slim, played expertly by Delroy Lindo himself. Now, Cornbread and Delta Slim are very good comedic relief, but Delta Slim's character has just a bit more depth that I will explain a little bit later in a beautifully improvised scene. So as they're picking up Delta Slim, who is basically saying, yo, he's good where he's at, you know, he doesn't mind staying at the juke joint he's currently playing at, Stack offers him more money and better alcohol, being this Irish beer that he bought down. And now Delta Slim is down for the cause. But while Stack is trying to handle business, Sammy notices, well, somebody is trying to catch Stack's eye. And that somebody is a white presenting woman being Mary, played by Haley Steinfeld. Now, one thing I really enjoy about this movie is that even in a big and smaller scale, this movie very much covers every aspect of racial identity and racial culture, from big scenes to small scenes to even just people's identities. Like Mary being a white presenting person. I specifically said that language because she is part black. But one of the things that was going on during this time, and honestly probably still to this day, is a notion of passing. And passing means you can identify as a person of color, or that you do identify as a person of color, but you might move through the world presenting yourself as a white individual, so that way you can get the benefits of your skin and still somehow acknowledge your culture. Now, Mary actually has some really good dialogue written for her where she mentions that she didn't necessarily want to move through the world in her white skin. She wanted to be around her people of color, but basically the people of color around her who loved her dearly would push her to move through the world in her white skin, basically telling her straightforward that she does not want to deal with any of the cons that come with, well, surrounding people of color. And I think it's a very interesting dialogue because nowadays we have a whole bunch of conversations about how non-people of color or non-presenting people of color love the benefits of our culture and our music, but don't like the cons of, well, racism. But on the flip side, we find out that Mary and Stack used to have a little something going on, and she really wanted to be with Stack, and Stack basically told her, no, we can't do this. For the exact reason of, you don't want to be surrounded by me or with me because of the problems that I would have to go through. I don't want that for you. So Stack now has a bit of personal and business mixing into play here. And speaking of more personal, we have Sammy now trying to break out into the ranks, where he catches the eye of Miss Pearline, played by Jamie Lawson. See, Stack has Delta Slim and Sammy play a little bit of music to introduce everybody to the juke joint, basically saying this is what you're gonna be dancing to when you come down to our juke joint tonight. And Miss Pearline, although married, is very much interested in Sammy. Now flipping back over to Smoke, he now has some personal stuff to attend to. He takes some time out of his day to go visit Annie, played by Wunmi Mosaku. And they also used to have a little thing going on. But theirs is a bit more deep-rooted because it wasn't just a one-night stand or just a fling. They had a family together. And unfortunately, their child passed away. So we're introduced to Annie when Smoke comes to her humble abode and sees the grave that she laid out for their child. It's adorned with milk and a stone. And they begin to talk a little bit about the things that transpired while he was away. And you also are introduced to the fact that Annie is a hoodoo woman. She was selling herbs to a pair of children that was buying herbs for their mother. And then Smoke proceeds to try and offer her money, but she says she doesn't want that money because it's covered in blood. And then Miss Annie proceeds to reintroduce herself to Mr. Smoke. And they get down to business in that beautiful shack. I swear it was one of the equivalents where like you was just expecting to see the walls shaking because they was getting down. Now Smoke is actually there to ask Annie to cook the food that he just got from Bo. And although she agrees, there's still a part of her that still very much is hurting from him leaving. I also have to backtrack a little bit because as we were talking about her being a hoodoo woman, there is the aspect that is introduced of a protection bag. She created a protection bag for Smoke before he left to Chicago. And he states that even though he didn't really believe in it, he did wear it for her. So now that our crew is assembled, everybody is now converging at the big kit and caboodle, the juke joint, where everything is about to go down. Cornbread is the bodyguard, basically making sure people come in or out paying whatever they need to at the door. But we have to backtrack a little bit to meet another player. His name is Remick. Remick is our big bad, played by Jack O'Connell. And how he's introduced is he basically flies into the scene smoking. And the sun is still out, so a man is smoking when the sun is out, our brains automatically click, this has to be a vampire. Well, as an audience member, your brain clicks. So he gets to a humble abode that is out in, it looks like the middle of nowhere. And there's vultures overhead, circling and even landing on this house as he approaches. Now the two people that are inside this humble abode is Joan and Bert. Joan is played by Lola Kirk, and Bert is played by Peter Dreymanis. Now, Joan and Bert are white supremacists because you can see their hoods and cloaks on the couch as Remick looks past them trying to get an invitation inside. He tells them how there's these Choctaw people that are chasing him and trying to hurt him even more. Because when we see him, his face is bloodied, he's smoking, and he's already been through the ringer. So these two people let him inside, and then the Choctaw people shortly arrive after. The Choctaw people try to inform Bert and Joan that, hey, he is not what he appears to be, and if you hand him over, we can handle this. But them, being the racist that they are basically saying they're not going to turn him over and proceed to call them slurs. So one of the Choctaw members proceeds to inform them in their native language that the sun is beginning to set and that they need to go. So the main leader basically wishes them luck, gives them a blessing in the native language, and walks away. And for those of you who haven't seen the memes, the Choctaw people are the definition of mind my business. When Bert and Joan did not want to turn Remick over, they said, okay, peace, and we never saw them again through the rest of the movie. They knew what they were doing. But now the Choctaw people leave, and Joan was the one who answered the door with a shotgun. So she closes the door, puts her shotgun down. Joan starts calling out for Bert, basically saying that everything is fine, the coast is clear. And she walks into the room to see Bert dead on the floor. Remick covered in his blood, basically saying that he'll be fine, he's just taking a nap. Bert wakes up now transformed, and he says, see, I'm doing just fine. And the scene ends with Joan's screams. Oh well. Now flashing back to the juke joint. Everyone's getting down, everyone's having a great time, and Smokestack and Annie are all talking about how, well, they need to make a little bit more money. The money that's coming in is a lot of these wooden coins that are being given to them from their plantation owners as a way of payment for the hard labor that they've been doing picking the cotton still. So another way to still make sure that people of color, specifically black people, are not building any wealth. But the night moves on, Mary ends up showing up for the evening, and while Stack is trying to basically get her to leave, she's saying, no, I'm gonna stay. We also see that Miss Pearline showed up, no husband in tow, and no ring on her finger. But we get to the biggest, bestest scene of, to me, the entire movie. It is this beautiful music and dance scene. This is the moment where Sammy finally begins to sing, full out, full heart, and shows the power that is held within his voice. Now, at the very tip top of the movie, we actually get a little bit of background about these storytellers. That each culture has a storyteller that can literally move between space and time with their music. The Choctaw people have them, Irish people have them, and African people would call them griot. So as Sammy is singing, time begins to melt away. And we see musicians from the future and dancers from the past, and everyone in between come together in this beautiful moment. When I say I cried, I cried. I sincerely could not stop talking about this scene for days. But his voice carries and ascends to the ears of Remick. And now Remick wants that power for his own. So now we're at the halfway point of the movie, and all hell breaks loose. The very first person that gets got is Mary herself, the one very well known for passing, and also kind of the mediator in between worlds at this point. Stack sends her outside to go talk to the people because they said they were willing to spend their money as long as they were invited inside. But basically the entire crew says no. You have 3 white people coming out of nowhere trying to get into a very much black establishment? Yeah, pass. Smoke even says that the last thing they need is somebody in the juke joint trying to talk to their woman being Joan, and something going down now the police are here and everything hits the fan. But Stack, after talking with Mary, basically come to the consensus that we should try and get their money. So Stack hands over his gun, Mary takes it, and proceeds to go outside to try and coax them and talk to them about being paying people inside this establishment. So Mary goes out there, tries to settle the score, get the money, which only ends up being gold coins and not the currency that they're used to handling. She begins to feel threatened when Remick starts to drool and his eyes glaze over in a new color. So she backs up, gun pulled, and tells them to leave, that they should all go back to where they came from. So she proceeds to try and enter the juke joint again, but unfortunately, Remick flies. And that is the last that we see of Mary, alive anyway. Now Mary, being a girl in between worlds, goes back up to the juke joint and tells Cornbread to let her in. And Cornbread, not knowing any better, of course lets Mary in. They've known her for years. Then she goes and finds Stack, pulls him into a back room, they get down to business, and then she takes him out. So now we're down 2 people. Now Annie is already saying that something is wrong because Mary was shot multiple times by Smoke, got up like it was nothing, and ran out of the juke joint. Annie keeps saying that they have to be the undead in some sort of way. She specifically keeps calling them haints. But when Stack finally breaks free out of the room that they've been holding his body in, she pours something in his face. And in reaction, his face smokes and sizzles, and he also runs out of the juke joint. That's when Annie pieces it together. This ain't haints. These is vampires. So now that everybody knows that these are vampires, we realize there's somebody that's missing. Cornbread. Cornbread had went out to go take a leak. And so he comes back to the juke joint and keeps asking, let me in. Annie's saying, why can't you just let yourself in? Why can't you just walk through here? You big enough? And Cornbread is like, well, that wouldn't be very kind, Miss Annie. So Delta Slim and Annie and now even Smoke are all like, something is off. So Cornbread has already tried his very nice, kind tactics and just switches to, hey, if you're not gonna let me in, at least give me my money. And Annie's telling him, don't you do that. Everybody should have listened to Annie. But Smoke still tries to hand him the money anyway. And the moment he hands him that money, Cornbread grabs his arm and tries to bite him. But luckily Smoke is quick on the draw and shoots Cornbread's face off. So now they know Cornbread isn't safe, but they also officially know, yes, vampires, which means nobody's coming in and anybody who's dead gots to get out. Now somebody else who also went missing during this time was Bo, because Grace had actually sent Bo out to pick up the car, bring it to the front so that way they can leave, get back to their daughter, because they do have a daughter that was also helping them run both the stores. But Bo's already transformed too. Pretty much anybody who left the juke joint, which was pretty much everybody at this point, because once Stack had died, they kicked everybody out. So now Remick has a whole team and congregation going on outside, and Bo is part of it. And while the rest of the crew is inside, while the Alive crew is inside trying to gather a plan on what to do and thinking to just wait it out for the night, you can see that Remick has a bit of power with his music in a way as well. So the thing with these vampires that I don't think is very much communal as a vampire rule is that they become this hive mind based off of the person who turned them. And there we have another musical moment where we have Remick singing the Rocky Road to Dublin. And this has been everywhere as well, being parodied, being, well, danced to at parties now, because no one can deny the song is a hit. But in context of the movie, it's his way of keeping a grip on the people that he now has control over. So on the inside of the juke joint, we still have Annie, Smoke, Delta Slim, Grace, Sammy, Pearline, and well, some random guy. We've seen him in a few scenes, but quite frankly, I don't remember what his name is. I don't remember if his name was even said. But he's there, and he's there to help with the numbers. At least one more person on their team. Yay, Living Squad. So the Living team basically starts to build a plan on what to do in case they end up getting inside. This is also keeping in mind that the only way they can get in is with an invitation. But somebody thought if they try to smoke them out, they might as well have a plan. So they start to prep some garlic, some steaks, and anything that they can get their hands on to protect themselves. Now the consensus and decision was more or less to wait it out for the night. But Grace Chow loses her shit. Now even though I understand her losing her shit, I still wish she didn't lose her shit. She's now seen her husband turned into one of these creatures. Remick, using the hive mind, starts to speak to her in I believe it was Cantonese or Mandarin, so her native tongue. And to top it all off, they say that they will go back into town to get her daughter. So with all that being said, and now they're singing even more so outside, she loses her mind and tells them to come on in. Which of course they proceed to do. So they all fight. Some vampires are taken out, most of the living is taken out. Delta Slim sacrifices himself. Pearline takes a bite to the neck trying to save Sammy. Annie takes a bite to the neck trying to save Smoke. The juke joint is now on fire because Grace threw a Molotov cocktail that Remick threw to the side and it hit the barn door. And in one last attempt to escape all the craziness, Sammy ends up going out of the top floor window and trying to limp his way to safety, while Smoke still fights off other vampires and his own brother. So Sammy is now outside, limping, still clinging onto his own guitar, and Remick catches up to him anyway. He slashes at his neck and keeps his grip on him, basically saying that they can make beautiful music together. And that line coming from this man, in the context of the entire movie, I was just like, this has to be the biggest message of cultural appropriation that I could probably see. Because you have a white man literally trying to take a black man's voice and use it for his own devices. And that hit hard. Now Sammy, being a preacher's boy, did the only thing he could think to do, which was pray. And as he begins to pray, Remick joins in on the prayer. And he begins to say that this prayer was the same prayer that was stated while his people were also being killed. Now I'm still not gonna empathize with the person who's trying to kill a black man, but that shit sucked. So Sammy is still listening to Remick spout his past, his backstory, kind of the big bad tells his plan kind of thing. He grabs his banjo and swings it at Remick, slicing his face because the big metal piece that was on the front part of it is silver. And silver is another tool that is used to defeat vampires, and that rule applies in this movie. So Remick is now hurt, but also because of the hive mind, the rest of the vampires are also hurting and in pain. Something we discovered earlier in the barn when Anthony had hurt Remick with a shotgun, and all the other vampires had also reacted to his pain. But luckily enough, the sun rises and brings Remick to a fiery, swirly end. And any of the vampires that were outside also ended up biting the dust, because they literally turned to dust. So the vampires are dealt with, but there's still one more thing we have to deal with. So Hogwood, the man that sold Smoke and Stack this barn for them to have their juke joint in, was also a white supremacist and ended up being Bert's uncle. And the barn wasn't meant to be a juke joint. It's meant to be a killing floor. So Hogwood now arrives early in the wee hours of the sun to kill anybody who was still there because, well, he's racist. So he shows up with a bunch of clan members, and they're ready to slaughter. But Smoke and Stack made a promise earlier when they had first met Hogwood. They said if any of his people, his racist people, his little clan members were to show up on their property, they would handle them. Now Stack is a vampire. He can't do anything. He touches the sun, he's out. But you know who's still gonna come through in that word? Smoke himself. So we hear it mentioned a few times that Smoke and Stack were part of the war, and all those skills come to fruition right here in this very scene. Smoke has set up a full attack plan to slaughter all of those clan members. He hides out in the bushes on the side, shoots a bunch of them with a rifle, has another Tommy gun set up because remember he was in Chicago, picks that up and also begins blasting. Unfortunately, he does take a hit to the belly, but not before he handles business. So as he's sitting there in his final moments, Annie visits him with their child. So at least you know Smoke gets a semblance of peace as he moves on to the next life. Then we also get cut back to the beginning of the movie where Sammy is arriving at his father's church and basically being told to let it go, as he was still clinging onto the neck of the guitar. But he hops back in the car with the neck in tow and drives off into the sunset. So then we get a flash forward to October 16th, 1992, which is another important date in cinema as that was the theatrical release for Candyman. But we now see Sammy in a beautiful jazz joint playing his music for the audiences. At the end of his set, he settles down at the bar for a drink, and a bodyguard proceeds to ask Sammy if he's okay with taking visitors because there was 2 people waiting outside for him. Sammy agrees, let them in. And who walks in? None other than Stack and Mary. See, they were lucky enough to be able to escape and avoid all the craziness when the fighting happened. Mary had ran away, and the theory is that Stack was actually being hidden inside of the juke joint, being protected by Smoke one last time. Stack basically tells Sammy that he wants to hear him play one last time before, well, he never sees him again. Sammy does, and Stack has a beautiful monologue about that night in 1932 being the last time he was ever free. And that's pretty much the end of the movie. So lucky for y'all, I carved out the time to be able to give y'all a summary, because if you haven't watched this movie, child, get it together. What I really loved about Sinners is that it's not just a movie, but an entire experience. If you had access to Spotify, you were able to see articles that gave even more backstory to the events prior to Sinners. For example, there's an article dated for October 5th about how the Irish mob and the Italian mafia were at a head because they were blaming each other for stolen goods. So the article basically dates who it was and how and when. There's another article dated August 1st, 1911, and it's all about the Celtic Hare, a ship that was filled with Irish immigrants making its way to the Boston Harbor. But upon arrival, it crashed completely void of people and soaked in blood. There's also a little line mentioning that a man was running away covered in smoke. So clearly this is Remick's first arrival to the United States. I'd also like to point out that the article about Remick's arrival in the Celtic Hare is very similar to Dracula and Nosferatu, where you have a ship that arrives void of people and full of blood. More specifically to Dracula, and a chapter of the book called The Last Voyage of the Demeter. This was also another movie where everybody was reacting inside the theater, and it was very much such a black moment. The amount of people that I heard say, "Woo, child," when Mary was spitting them lines about, Stack's activities in the bedroom, it was a reaction that, only people like us can have. But one of the main things I would love to talk about is the music. The music is so intricately done for this movie that the soundtrack makes it even better. The soundtrack alone is a movie. If you're listening to the soundtrack without watching the movie, you can see every single scene that's happening. The only other time I've really seen this is when Lin-Manuel Miranda decided to do an album inspired by the Warriors movie. It's an 80s action film inspired by the gangs of New York during that time. And listening to that soundtrack, I can still see every single scene that was happening, even though it's been years since I've seen that movie. One of the more intricate things that come into it is the instruments themselves. Because there is a dynamic of the blues being a heavy part of the movie, and the blues is such a heavy part of Black culture. The blues stemmed from the pain of Black people. And in this movie, it is shown how the blues can not only show the pain, but help you heal from it. Whether it be hip hop, R&B, the blues, hell, country music, it is something that is deeply ingrained in our bodies and our blood. And Sinners is very much an homage to that as well. You have this beautiful improvised moment where after Delta Slim sees the Chain Gang, he proceeds to tell a heartbreaking story about a person he used to play music with who unfortunately was lynched. As this scene is going, you hear in the background the hints of this man's screams and cries, as if Delta Slim was there reliving the moment. And the moment he's done telling the story, he breaks out into blues. Because sometimes the only way you can make it through the pain is by singing. He begins to hum a very heartbreaking tune, and Stack tells Sammy, you need to hop on in. So even though it was an improvised moment, it's true to form how Black people can take so much pain and turn it into something beautiful. There's also this beautiful scene, the beautiful scene. It's the scene where Sammy starts to sing in the juke joint, and he starts to be surrounded by all the spirits of his ancestors, from the past and the future. You have a man dressed similar to Bootsy Collins, some hip-hop dancers that are Crips and Bloods, which ironically brings them together in a communal space, and African dancers as well. Since we do have two Asian American characters, their ancestors show up as well. And it is a party for the decades, literally. The music swirls in between the history and the future, the dancing as well, all culminating to the ironic statement of burning the house down. Because in Black culture, we have certain phrases like burning the house down or like the roof is on fire when something is just that hot. And it literally happens in this movie. Like I said, this movie is Black as fuck, and it's beautiful in every sense of the word. Now, Sinners definitely touches on culture, touches on music, but another thing that is very important to the movie is religion. Religion and belief systems. You have Annie, who's a hoodoo woman, and Jedediah, who is a pastor. And there's constant commentary about religion, even if it's not outwardly said. So with the religion aspect at play, there was something else that was kind of nagging at my mind. The whole movie is called Sinners. And one thing we all are infamous with is the ideal of the 7 deadly sins. So as I'm going through this movie, I started thinking and noticing that plenty of our characters embody aspects of the 7 deadly sins. Like the entire movie basically attributes to the aspect that we are all sinners to varying degrees. Like even before we get to the aspect of the 7 deadly sins, it was very important that Mary and Pearline were being exhibited as adulterers. It wasn't just by chance that these two people were specifically married and still lusting over somebody else. So to break it down a little bit, I was able to find the smaller and bigger aspects in which people identified with the 7 deadly sins. So starting out at the top, you have pride. Now, pride is actually attributed to pretty much every single one of the deadly sins. As I was looking into it, they said that pretty much every sin would stem from a sense of pride. But if you want to be specific, we can say that Joan, Bert, and Hogwood are the prime identities of pride. They're literally white supremacists, thinking that they're better than other people, better than Black people. And of course, that pride leads to their demise. Then you have greed. Now, greed can be attributed to really everybody because a lot of the characters were motivated by money specifically, but I decided to say that Stack and Bo Chow were the main people that can go under the greed aspect. They were the main people motivated by money. Stack consistently says, we gonna make some money, we gonna make some money. That is like one of the taglines. Bo Chow and Grace Chow were very much focused on money as well because they were big on negotiating with Smoke about how much he was gonna pay for the food and for the signage. Now, I did already have a hint on who Lust is. Pearl and Mary, of course, being the adulterers and lusting over other characters, but also Sammy. Now, Sammy is a preacher boy, but he was definitely lusting after Pearline, even when she said she was a married woman. They also have a scene where they get down to business in one of the rooms inside the juke joint. Now, I'm curious who you might think embodies this one, but I think envy is embodied by Remick. Remick wants Sammy's power for himself because he is jealous that he can have that power to call the ancestors. So I think Remick is the embodiment of envy in this movie. Then you have gluttony, and gluttony is about overindulging, and so I would have to say that Delta Slim falls into our glutton category. He's an alcoholic. He says consistently that he sinks his money into the bottle and, quite frankly, himself. He does have a moment where he semi-sobers up towards the end of the movie, but that's because he was scared shitless. I quite frankly doubt that Delta Slim would have made any different choices if it wasn't for, well, the vampires killing him that night. He would have kept indulging and overindulging in alcohol. That ultimately would have taken him to his grave if it wasn't for the vampires that evening. Now moving on to Wrath. Wrath has to be Grace Chow. Like I said, I understand why she lost her shit. I just wish she didn't lose her shit. She was absolutely angry at the situation. She lost her husband. Her daughter was being threatened. She's frustrated and angry and wrathful. Now, another aspect of wrath isn't just the anger itself, but also the anger that leads to vengeance, which is exactly what she was seeking against Remick. And even though she didn't find it against Remick, she did find her own sense of closure by being able to take her husband out with her. So Grace Chow is definitely my wrath category. Now, coming down to sloth. I really had to look into it because sloth is in general attributed to laziness, but I looked into it a little bit more, and sloth can also mean a disinterest in self-improvement and also apathy in spirituality, okay? So I technically have two people that fall under this category. So ever so lightly, I say Delta Slim falls into the sloth category because he had no interest in self-improvement. When we met him at the train station, he was saying that he was happy where he was at the other juke joint, playing music for whatever alcohol and whatever money he was getting. He had no intention of moving up in the world. He had lost his interest in moving up in the world after his friend had died, after his friend was murdered. And so I do think Delta Slim does embody aspects of sloth. However, my main person for sloth is Smoke. Now again, sloth isn't just laziness, but an apathy towards spirituality. And Smoke has that apathy. He doesn't really care about spirituality. He's not a big religious person. You don't see him embodying any crosses or anything like that. We do see Grace wearing one, but he doesn't associate himself with spirituality. He even said that he didn't believe in the hoodoo rituals that Annie participated in. When she gave him that protection bag, he wore it for her, not because he believed it would protect him. Now, it did actually protect him because when Stack tried to bite him, you can see that Stack was being repelled by that bag. But Smoke never really attributed himself to any spirituality. He didn't pray. He never said anything about his beliefs in God. He was just completely apathetic. And so I think Smoke falls under our sloth category. And if you think there's other characters that can embody a different sin even better or can be switched around, you let me know, but this is where my breakdown goes. Okay, so we talked a little culture, we talked a little music. Let's talk about the horror. I will say this movie is not scary to me, but again, it takes a lot for me to be scared for a movie. But I will say that it is indeed a horror movie. It's bloody, it's gory, plenty of people die. This movie is bloody to the T, and poor Michael B. Jordan has an aversion to fake blood, and I saw their interview about it, and poor Michael B. Jordan. But thank you for suffering through it because it made for good scenes. I think the main thing that was actually scary for me is how easily Remick could use his words to try and talk to people. He really is a snake in the grass, very much like the one they kill earlier in the movie in the back of Smoke and Stack's truck. Also, one little detail that I would like to point out is Remick. So in the moments where you see, or maybe Remick senses that he has the most power, he starts to speak in his Irish brogue. But anytime he's trying to persuade people and coax people, he's talking in a Southern accent. So that was something that was very interesting to me because it's a bit of code switching in a way, which is something that is very popular in the Black culture. So to have Remick have his own sense of code switching is very interesting. Do you technically call it appropriation? Or is code switching just a universal thing that anyone can do? But what is scary about the movie, aside from the whole vampire aspect, is as a person of color, there is a notion and question of whether or not we can ever be free. During that last cutscene, Stack does say that for a few hours he was free when they were partying at the juke joint and after the sunset. But now, he can never see the sun again, and he'll never see his brother again. He's still a person who has to move through the shadows. So it opens up the question of what is everyone's definition of freedom? And is there a moment where we can ever truly be free? And quite frankly, that was scarier than anything I've watched in the past 10 years. So I think that's where I'm gonna end this one, folks. This movie, quite frankly, is a heavy piece of beautiful art. There's social commentary, there's blood, there's gore, there's beauty, there's music. It truly is something to behold. And for that, I give this movie 5 out of 5 Ivies. If you haven't seen the movie already, you sincerely need to watch it. you are missing out on such a beautiful piece of cinema. And if you have watched it, let me know what your favorite scene was. But that's all for now, folks. You can still follow me at H3LLO_IVY. And until next time, stay alive and say bye to Ivy.
The fire's getting started. The fire's getting started. You got just what you wanted. Be careful what you wish for. You knocking on the wrong door. You want that dark side of me? Say hello to Ivy.
Who's next?